In some ways, this week's video is almost like an extension of, or a kind of a part two of last week's. And last week's I talked about finding your truth of the moment, okay? And how we have a tendency to see our truth, or kind of our long-term truth, as being kind of static, and then we take the new experiences and try to fit them into the old truths. And rather, I'm suggesting that we consider that the truth of the moment maybe gets the priority. It's like trusting that the truth of the moment is the most important truth for the experience we're in. And then those old truths can be, maybe that's what comes to you in the moment, or maybe there's a new variation. But that was last week. This week, I want to talk about, I just lost the word, the rules of engagement, okay? Like, we have a tendency to have a process or a template or rules of engagement, the way we do things. Okay, you do this, you don't do this. You have to do this before you can do this. That's a big one. And they can become overwhelming, because it's like, well, I can't do this yet because I haven't done this. And it's not time to do this, or the conditions aren't here to do this, so I can't do anything. And all these rules of engagement and this process stuff, if they become too static and too intellectual, they can become really overwhelming and really limiting. So the alternative, kind of like last week I talked about our truth of the moment, our alternative is to figure out what those rules of engagement are for this moment, like for this experience. And maybe my old rules don't apply to this. Maybe some of them do, but it's like open myself up, open up my intuition, and here we're going to do some trial and error. Sometimes not one of our favorite things, because we might have to make mistakes. And we're going to basically see what works, rather than assuming that we can and can't do things because of our rules of engagement, our processes that we think, we're going to check out which of those things actually work. And we're going to try some things. Like, I know that normally you have to do this before you can do this, but right now I feel like doing this and the conditions are perfect to do it. So let's just go right there. Rather than doing A, B, C, let's just go right to C and see if that works. So we're going to be breaking our own rules by spontaneously trying things. And we can save so much time, because a lot of times those rules of engagement were static. Maybe they were necessary at the time when we made them up. And maybe they weren't. Maybe there was just a story that we told ourselves, and maybe that's how we crossed through our resistance, is we created these rules that we had to follow to get through. Well, they got us through, but maybe we don't need that anymore. Maybe there's a shortcut. Maybe we can just go right here now. And we're not going to find that out unless we challenge our rules of engagement and start trying things and following our gut and brainstorming and just like trial and error. Well, let's see. Let's roll around in it and see what's possible. And your mind will be telling yourself, you can't do that. You can't just do that. You can't just go right up and say hi to them. You can't just go right over there, and you can't just like start a new business like because you feel like it. You can't just whatever. You can't just quit your job and start a new career. Well, that's maybe a little drastic, but you can't. It's like, maybe you can. Well, let's explore it. Let's see if it is viable. Now, let's try things out. Let's start working with it. And so it's really liberating, and it removes a lot of the limitations, a lot of the overwhelm, a lot of the resistance. And then we find out is some of those rules don't really pertain to us anymore. If maybe they never really did, maybe we just, like I said before, it's something it's a story we told us stuff to give us the courage to do it before, but now we don't need that anymore. So I'm being a little redundant here. So I think that's my basic point, is to just consider your way of doing things. And maybe you have these tried, and maybe you have these processes to do this and this and this. And I'm not asking you to just get rid of all those, but maybe even to just check them and see if they still pertain, and if you really need to do all those things, or maybe there's a simple and more direct way to just go there. And your guide for this is going to be your heart and your intuition and your sense of things, and feeling drawn to try new things, and then having the courage to use some trial and error and to explore and to do some experiments and see what works, and the willingness to fail. If it doesn't work, okay, well, I'll try something else. What does work? That sounds really laborious and really inefficient, but it actually saves way more time than trying to get all of our rules of engagement, all of our ducks in a row with that. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. Whereas if we just start trying shit, it actually, it doesn't feel efficient, and it's humbling because some of the stuff doesn't work, but we start just playing around with it, just seeing how it works, exploring, that's how we figure things out, because we're now different than we were when we created those rules of engagement. We're now in a different situation. The world is different. There's, the energy here is different. Everything's different. So maybe we should just kind of wing it a little bit, because that's what it feels like. It feels like we have a general plan, but let's explore, let's brainstorm and see what works. Let's just start trying some stuff. I've used the thing a lot of times with the people in the graphic design firm, that they're just brainstorming, and like, no idea is a bad idea. They're just ideas. Some of them may be viable, some of them may not, but let's just work with them and see what all the ideas are. And then let's start trying some of them and see if some of these things work. There's a lot we get by not shutting down the ideas that don't seem practical or don't seem rational, because maybe the solution is not as practical as we think. Maybe we don't. Anyway, I'm being redundant. So that is my video for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing week. And as you go through things, maybe challenge your rules of engagement a bit. When you're try some new things, see what works. Okay? Maybe break some of your rules and some of your assumptions that you have to do this before you can do that. Maybe it's true, but ask yourself, is it true? Do I really need to do this before I can do that? Or is that just a story that I'm telling myself? And I will see you in a week.